On my channel, I like to talk about illusion, imagination, the ecology of souls, existentialism, all kinds of Gnostic, ancient, archaic jargon. Well, interesting, profound concepts. That's a more tasteful way to say it. But I had this thought that it's like defining the difference between imagination, illusion, and delusion, because all these words have they all come from a place of the imagination, or of a perception, of a vision. And oftentimes I wonder, I'm like, are my imaginations, my creativity, is it mine, or am I tapping into something else? It's like, who's to know if any thought I've had is really originated in me? I mean, of course, a lot of stuff I've heard and digested, and then have my own way of expressing what that means to me. But the imagination, I find, is part of our essence. It's like to procreate, or to do art, or architecture, or whatever. It's all it all comes from like the domain of imagination. And so, because we all see things differently, we all have our own definition for what is a delusion of grandeur, and an illusion of grandeur, if you will. And just imagine it. Imagination. I think one important part to realize is how it's regarded. If it's regarded as truth, it could be a delusion if it doesn't align. I mean, it might be that specific person's truth, but not others. But I don't really have a negative perception of any of that. Like, some people who live in like a delusion, they are like kind of living their best life in a way. It's like they're of a disposition that's like things make sense for them, and that's a respectable thing. It takes a certain amount of evolution and creativity to even accomplish that. So, as a seeker of the truth, there's a lot of cognitive dissonance and a lot of suppositions and like dubious ideations, because it's all convoluted. Like, there's all kinds of duality. Like, there's always exceptions to the rule. There's always one person that it worked for that didn't work for anyone else. So there's a lot of kind of stuff like that, and it's anecdotal a lot of times. But I admire the creativity, and creativity, like, this is another thought I had. I don't know if all creativity is inherently good, because there's also the archetype of the serpent, from the esoteric teachings, the serpent in the garden. And this was said to be the most crafty of all the creatures. And crafty, I would say that falls into the category of creative. It's just creativeness to subvert, maybe dominate, control, manipulate, exploit, or any of those things. So, yeah, not all creativity is good per se. But it is part of our essence, like I said. I mean, what would we be without that? Like, would we even be able to claim any kind of autonomy? I don't really know if I've ever had an original thought, but all the thoughts I have had, I feel like is compressing into this kind of novelty in my own perceptions, which are always changing and always subject to change, because I'm limited and I only know so much, and I can only perceive so much and handle so much, but we take it in stride and we perceive things a certain way and gain a certain understanding from that. Sometimes truth can be relative, other times truth can be like universal. It just depends on what it is. But the creativity goes outside perhaps the realm of truth. Oops. And that's kind of the playing field that we're in. We're playing around with what is possible. What can we create? What can we procure out of this experiment? What value do we derive from it? I'm just speaking in broad strokes here. I'm not using any specific examples. Obviously, I'm just conceptualizing these abstract and profound depths to our, like the nature of our being, and how we perceive in our consciousness, and how we orient ourselves through this space. And when it comes to attachment, we can get attached to a truth or a delusion or an illusion. But the attractor is a certain kind of aesthetic that we identify with and interact with, I guess you could say, depending on what it is. I'm just speaking really broad and generally here. But I am always profoundly astounded by the possibilities of the imagination. I mean, look at these epic tales like Lord of the Rings and other accounts of people who've been to these other worlds, which I try not to give away my faith to anything like I've said, but I really do believe that there's other worlds out there. Like, if this is possible, there's a version of it probably with less fuckery. Pardon. But there's a lot of that here. There's a lot of exploitation, extortion, and it limits us, that kind of thing. Like, we only have so much choice here. Like, we have to work to live, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but if you struggle with your work and don't enjoy it, that is a form of hell. That's a miserable evil. And I'm not saying hell doesn't exist, but I think it exists here. I think we get a sampler plate of hell here. And heaven. So we get the contrast. This is like, this is a sort of school. It's just such a fundamental and limited plane of existence, but it's still a dynamic in which we kind of test ourselves or grow through this really constricted and limited and forgetful kind of mode of being. We're very singular. I think we're more in the moment than we think we are, but also, what is time? I think we get it, when you like really get lost in the moment, time goes by differently. Like, you're like, what? 5 hours have gone by. It feels like half an hour or something, you know? Anyway, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the origins of imagination and what imagination means to you. Because to me, I value it as one of the most wonderful and incredible aspects of our being. So, I love talking about it.